Hello and welcome to Wait, It Gets Better, the improvisational storytelling podcast, where every week we bring you a story on a silver platter. I'm, of course, Levi.
And I'm Seth.
No read today, but we are here to tell you a story. I think this is going to be our last episode of this current series. So, Seth, cross-species meditation is what we called it, kind of interestingly. Seth, you want to do the recap?
Sure. I will throw together the best I can remember.
Great. I'll be happy to fill in.
All right. So this is kind of taking place, it's like I think Reed had said otherworld fantasy.
Yeah.
So it's, I guess it kind of fantastical, different kind of sentient creatures. So on this world, we have, a humanoid, a simian, so that would be like an ape type of creature,
right.
A bird kind of creature, and a dragon kind of creature, and a fish creature, kind of like a dolphin, I think.
Yeah.
I think there was 5. That's 5. And so anyways, I think what we had established kind of is that, for the most part, years ago, the dragons are the original inhabitant sentient being. The humanoid and the others would have come in from like a crashed exploratory ship and kind of either evolved or kind of helped along with the different research or testing that was being done. However, then after some time, this meditation thing that they could do, kind of like kind of sit quiet, calm, and then you could clearly see kind of like decisions or choices or like answers to something, right?
Yeah.
And the dragons were doing this, and eventually they were able to kind of reach out and kind of cross that bridge with the other sentient species. And that's kind of the litmus test that is used to determine the sentientness kind of in this world, is that, species ability to do, this, kind of meditative
path
thing.
Yeah.
And I know there's one of the creatures, and I think it was the dragons, was it, that could do this, like not necessarily like in waking and sleeping, but could do it like on a constant basis. Was that it?
Yeah. It was like he had multiple personality disorder.
Oh, right.
In his past. And so his other personalities that were kind of always active in his mind were able to sort of always be actively doing this meditation. And so he oftentimes seemed kind of like a prophet who is able to, even in his waking state, sort of come up with fantastic answers to things where most people have to like meditate for a long time in order to get the answer. But he's definitely sort of an outcast of society.
Right. So this would be the wise old man. I thought there was one of the species that could do this, but I think it's just the wise old man.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And I can't remember if we gave him a name or not, but
yeah, I think we did, but Reed had it written down and I don't remember, so it's fine.
Okay. So anyways, our wise old man, that's kind of what he does. And he kind of lives at the base of this mountain, or kind of up the mountain, kind of at the base of one of the main dragon places.
Yeah.
And then we've got Quartet kind of put together. I think it was a humanoid, a bird, and a fish species.
Yeah, I think that sounds right.
And one of them, and again, I can't remember exactly. I know there was like something with like doing research.
Yeah, it was like a collaborative group. I think at the base of it was a collaborative group of these different species who were sort of working together.
Right, because one of the things that they have an issue with, obviously, I think some people, or it might be hinted at, or as they're discovering that, because it's been long enough, because I think in a crash scenario and then kind of, being cut off and hand to mouth long enough, you'll kind of forget where you came from. And so I think then different things that they're finding would indicate that, a bunch of them didn't originate here.
Right. That's kind of one of the big questions, is how are so many sentient species able to sort of evolve out of one place?
Right. And I think that was one of the things that was coming up and that they were researching. So I think they just got the Quartet, and then the wise old man, kind of the other setup. And then I think the thing I had last week put the perspective of framing the story, fiction by another name. And the fiction by another name would be Ivanhoe. So that's kind of what I think we need to do this week, is frame how this story comes together to kind of mirror, the Ivanhoe story, but by a different name.
Right.
So, as far as major recap stuff, did I forget something, or?
No, that sounds pretty much it.
That's about kind of where we stand. One of the things, I think I had this thought last week. Actually, I think I had this thought first week, and it might be able to fit into the story a little bit. And I had an idea of how it would be, and I'm gonna say it because, again, we're gonna have to figure out how these characters are going to then play out kind of the Ivanhoe story. But what I think I'm gonna do, so in the Ivanhoe story, you have like Isaac of York and Rebecca, right?
Right.
And in the Ivanhoe story, they're Jews, and from a historical perspective, at the time, Jews were kind of like in and out of like all, because it's like during the Crusades and stuff.
Correct.
However, like the Jews were like in and out of like just about everywhere because of the dispersion and all of that. And so they were kind of like this. I don't want to get into anything, too harsh, but like for intents and purposes,
they were
like
untrusted. People didn't trust them.
They didn't trust them. But part of it too, before they became kind of untrustable, they got kind of into positions of power to a certain degree because they were multilingual.
Oh, right. Yeah, for sure.
Because they would have their own language, but then they would adopt into different languages in the countries that they would be in.
Right.
And so a lot of interpreters, a lot of different emissaries would have them with them because they were well-versed and they had connections in a lot of different places.
Right, that makes sense.
And so they could get messages, translate things, and kind of, it was like a brokerage system, right? And so, and I think in that day too, because I think Isaac of York was like a money lender kind of thing, if I remember the story correctly.
That's what it was, yes.
And so anyways, I had this idea, I think the first thing, but then it was like right at the end and we were wrapping up, and then I didn't get a chance the second time.
Yeah, let's hear it.
But I think this, one of the things, because my uncles used to do this, but it's something you can do. Like, so with the bird class, right, there's parrots. Of course we have parrots, which can be taught how to speak, right?
Right.
Because I know that was one of the things that got brought up in the first one. One of the reasons that there's like kind of a unity between everybody, but because everybody kind of holds a monopoly on each of the different kind of major resource, no one is kind of, reach for the stars because, if
right, they have
these people need more food to get a bigger population. Well, it's kind of in the water. Well, they can't fish because the fish people kind of have the monopoly over the oceans, right? And so you can't really do much on the oceans unless you have the the go ahead. And one of the things would be a language barrier, correct?
Yeah.
So one of the things with the birds, anyways, my uncles did this a couple times, but you can take crows or different kind of birds, and if you cut their tongue, you can, like a parrot, teach them to speak.
Really?
Yeah. They never got it to work, but it is something, and I think you can do magpies too. Magpies, you can get them to talk. But so anyways, using that idea, so inserting for the Ivanhoe part of the story, the position of the Jews, as you would have it, would take place with this kind of class. And a lot of them are like, because with birds, I think we've touched this with birds, like the different cultural differences where birds will have like 6 chicks, but then it's like, well, the nest is only big enough for 3, so buy 2 of you, right?
Right.
Whereas in like the humanoid, they'd be like, oh, well, we'll find, care for this, where other ones would just like kind of kick them out of the nest if there wasn't enough food or, not enough space. And so what I think this other class of, I guess you say, bird people are kind of this secondary class that are kind of reject from the bird people. Not that they can't associate with the bird people, but what they've done is then they've made the habit of, cutting their tongues. That way they're the go-between between all the other
races and stuff.
Races where then they can communicate, whereas like the people can't exactly make the sounds that a bird can, right? Because of the beak. But if they have the ability to do that, then what's that?
I was thinking, as you're talking about this, I like this idea. I think this would be really good. But I was thinking about the D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, their lore, and how they treat humans. Humans are like this. All the races sort of view themselves as really good, elves and dwarves and things like that, view themselves as really, their culture is really important and powerful. but all of them kind of look up to the humans a little bit because their lives are so short and they get so much accomplished. So could I submit a friendly amendment to your idea that they would basically those people who are the go-betweens and the in-betweens are the humans, or is that not?
I mean, my idea for it would be that it wouldn't be like one whole like group.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
But like a subgroup that is
comprised
like
of,
in this case, comprised of, mostly from the one group, but kind of set aside.
Yeah. Okay.
And then filling that role. That was my idea.
Yeah, no, that's good. I'm
kind
totally
of
fine with sticking with that.
Yeah. That way no one group really has that thing. I was just using that because I knew that with the birds and thinking like, okay, well, you could make that, kind of subclass where they've been like thrown out of the birds, but because they've survived, they're kind of still part of that, but they're also, kind of kept around by, all the other races because they can then mimic in the other speech.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But then also their own kind of separated group. That's kind of how I was thinking.
Yeah.
To have that. And so that, I don't know, that to me, that kind of seemed to work to make that, group of things where then the characters of, that would be taking the place of, the Rebecca or Isaac of York might kind of fill a role that they
yeah, absolutely
would be holding. So anyways, that there's my initial kind of step in with, an idea forward for
yeah. So if let's try and consider, not to have a lesson in the story of Ivanhoe, but let's just have a sort of a little bit of what's the plot line of Ivanhoe? It's English, Middle Ages, Normans, conquest of the island, tensions between Saxons and Normans are rough. King Richard is in Austrian prison after having been captured on his way from the Crusades. His brother, Prince John, sits on the throne, and under his reign, Norman nobles have begun routinely abusing their power. Saxon lands are capriciously repossessed, and many Saxon landowners are made into serfs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ivanhoe returns, unbeknownst to his father, disguised as a religious pilgrim. So already we have sort of a premise. We know who our hero is going to be. Our hero is going to be this kind of returning guy who's returning in secret. Okay, I'll submit my unique artifact, which is what my story element is. And it is known as the Mandate of Heaven, right? You familiar with Mandate of Heaven?
Yeah.
So it's sort of a Chinese it's a Chinese government philosophy, which is that heaven mandates the ruler. So kind of like how the kings sort of believe that they were, God appointed them, like in the Middle Ages. But what it is it's an engine. It's a generation module. It's a dodecahedron about the size of a basketball, completely transparent with a light that pulses out from in the inside. About 5 pounds. And what it has inside of it is essentially infinite potential. And what it was being used for and experimented with was a way to manipulate evolution in order to terraform planets according to how you wanted them to be. So it was a complex computer. It was a complex biological processor. It's a complex laboratory. With it, you can create and grow anything as long as the elements are there. It's the Mandate of Heaven. It's the way in which to turn things around to exactly how you need them, as long as you have the time. And it was sent to this Earth, this planet, years ago, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years ago. And it began to do its work, turning over and terraforming the planet, not through giant, huge, sweeping things, but it consumes energy, it consumes sunlight and energy, and then over the course of however many years begins to produce life and begins to sort of help the biological systems work in order. Something happened along the way. It wasn't supposed to get this far. It was supposed to have come and picked up a long time ago. It is simply doing the task of making more and more complex life. So the dragons were the first race to sort of evolve into a place of higher thought process. So technically, if we would be looking at this as a technicality, the planet is the dragon's planet. However, these other races, these other species begin to change. And as this mandate of heaven wasn't given any sort of end direction, it is just literally just continuing on to create a more and more and more complex place, right?
Mm-hmm.
So who knows how long it'll take for every single animal on the entire planet to develop sentience, but that's kind of where it's going. My thought process is that it's what drew the humans there originally, detection of some strange energy. But as soon as they landed, the mandate of heaven started to use the ship to further its goal, which is sort of what helped the whole human beings forgetting how to use their own things, is because, the batteries were drained, and the only technology allowed is technology that has come out of this mandate of heaven, And when I say allowed, I mean the only type of electricity that works is the kind that is infused with the power that this thing has. So if at the end of the story it blows up, if at the end of the story it continues on, if at the end of the story nothing happens, that's the reason why all of these sort of people are incredibly advanced, right? But they're not advanced in ways that would help them get off the planet. And they can't be, because this mandate of heaven is there to keep them there. That's not exactly what mandate of heaven. I was thinking when I first thought of mandate of heaven, I meant I thought the mandate of heaven, the will of the heavens, to keep them there. But that's what this thing is.
So it's terraformed what's there to continue making more complex what's already there, and so it needs to keep what it has, kind of locked in the kind of the symbiosis that it's created.
Yeah, and so much so that it doesn't allow it. It's very difficult to advance technology and science in a direction that does not conform with it, right? So people can do it, but they have to be insane. They have to be strange. They have to not think that in the normal way in order to advance technology in a way that makes it so we can see out of telescopes. It's really difficult to make telescopes and have it work the way you want it to or need it to in order to focus right. It's you can make binoculars, but making telescopes is difficult. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's people who there's ultra naturalists. There's people who sort of kind of maybe deny that there are such a thing as stars. They see up, and there's a generalized thought process that those are like the sun, and we have a lot of technology, but it's kind of like a bit of a brainwashing as well, where it's it's just easier to believe that there is no going up there, and I want to stress to say that this mandate of heaven isn't the villain. It's not malicious. It's just the
background programming.
Yeah, it's just the background programming. Anyways, so who is our hero and what is he coming back from? I mean, we can do a war if we want it to be a war. And what is our hero? Is our hero a dragon? The original race? Is our hero?
I'm trying to think of how the perspective that would be. Because ultimately you need probably two to kind of have the pit of the Saxons and the Normans.
Right. Because so the idea is that right now all of the species, they all sort of live in a harmony.
I think that would be the idea, but
I mean, they could be living in a sort of disharmony. There could be a war.
Yeah. Let's see.
I mean, if we want to go directly, Ivanhoe, then we could say that these cast-offs or these other people who became the sort of intermediaries have begun to sort of collect in a place and sort of be gaining a kind of a kind of secondary power that certain groups don't like. And so a kind of war was beginning to be waged on them. If we're going to say something like the Crusades, it's difficult because how do you build all of the tension that happened between the Turks and the Jews and the Muslims and the, everyone in Europe? How do you build all of that into a story, besides just saying they were fighting against them and they came back,
I could see how perhaps perhaps, okay, so I'm thinking as far as like a class system with the, at least the Saxons and the Normans thing, I would say you have two, with the 5, you would have two pairs that would have it like a general closality.
Right.
Where you'd have the birds would be the closest to the dragons because of flight and, like home location. The other two being the humanoid and would it be sapien or simian?
Yeah, simian.
And so I would say some of that tension could probably be brought together where one area is like more or less taking England, whatever it is it could be like, let's say, if you put the dragons as the Saxons, there'd be, let's say, fewer of them, and the birds, kind of a nation group of the birds have kind of taken over most of the land. For the most part, they kind of live in semi-harmony, but there's a lot of tension that, the birds are kind of abusing their power of being more of them and, kind of like helping themselves to different things.
Right.
Which would then put, what do you call it? Our hero probably is a dragon.
Well, here's the thing I'm thinking. Why do you have federations? Like, right? The only reason you need to have federations and you don't just have treaties is because there were problems in the past. It's like the reason why you need a centralized government is because there were enough problems in the past that they needed to centralize it in order to get rid of their opposition. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So with a confederacy of these different countries and the different, territories, there's this kind of constant but yet understood level of sort of headbutting that is always happening, and because these species at the interior of their countries have the strongest hold, and then as they get closer to the exterior, there is a lot of border fighting that just goes on, right? And some of the species view that as horrifying and we need to just live in total peace, right? Like the humans. But other species view that as the way in which we communicate and establish ourselves with each other. Not to say that they don't mourn for their dead, but you're sort of constantly at odds with each other, and that's just kind of how it is. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And then that raises sort of a bigger question about, like, what does it mean to be sentient? Does that mean that we sort of give up some of the animal instincts of like territory protection and, tribe stuff, which I don't really have a good answer for at this present time, but I've thought a lot about, it's like, what does it mean to actually be sentient or conscious? Does that mean that we need to sort of give up some identity of our individual self? But so how I see it is that humans are sort of constantly at this kind of, they're constantly trying to get people to be at peace. Where these species, because the reality is that these humans, even though they've been under the effect of Mandate of Heaven, for hundreds of years now, or thousands of years, or however long, they still were very well evolved before.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not any more sentient, but they do have millions of years of evolutionary advantage over these other species is hundreds of thousands of years sort of idea, So the other species not defer to them, but kind of look up to them and value their advice, even though humans fail to understand any of the species, like specific, what they consider to be important to them personally, just like they fail to see what's important to humanity personally. But the whole crux of this whole thing is that human beings are more likely to go to war for other species. They're more likely to go in and help out another species fight if they view that species as sort of at a disadvantage or being taken advantage of or whatever. So I don't know. I'm trying to set up this kind of premise. I'm just talking through this premise, trying to set up this idea that there's some conflict that's going on, right? And I'm not trying to say that humans are a plague, but humans sort of can come into a situation and severely, what's the word? Pour gasoline on the fire of any situation, because of their brutal efficiency and their adaptability and their insane way of coming up with, ways to think around And all these other species are a bit kind of like still sort of developing who they are, and they're on different tracks as far as how to figure out how to do things. You know what I mean? So I'm just trying to like set the premise for kind of an armed conflict, right? Where the avian species has been kind of in the background harassing the settlement of dragons who are sort of working out towards the sea as their scientists are beginning to sort of develop maybe a purification process for steel or a rocket propulsion process, and then the avians and the dragons have begun to sort of fight, but not really fight. Like, did you know the border of China and India, there will regularly be groups of hundreds of Chinese and Indian soldiers who will like get into huge fist fights, right? Because they can't shoot each other, because to shoot each other would be an armed conflict, but they get into these border disputes and they end up like just fighting, just like hundreds of people fighting fist fights, right? And China isn't attacking India and India isn't attacking China, but there is this kind of tension that's just happening, And I'm just trying to set up a scenario, a war, right? And
so I'm thinking maybe there's higher tension back, because perhaps wherever this ship crashed is perhaps considered a holy site.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Or something of importance. And so that could be like the idea of this crusade where then all these different races, as though most of the time at home they mingle, some have some a bit superiority and they might abuse it, but it's kind of sloughed under the rug because everybody's getting along. But then because wherever the ship crashed, perhaps that's also where the mandate of heaven is.
Yes.
And so it's like a draw. And so they'll send out groups and they'll kind of fight for control of that area. And their scientists will, gather information. And sometimes, the avian might have an alliance with the dragons well enough and their scientists go at it. But then the humans kind of get some aid from, the sea, the Sea Federation, and, with their numbers of the 8 people, and they kind of take it over. And then, as the 8 people kind of come up, they team up with the birds, because now the birds and the dragons are fighting and they've come in, or maybe the birds do it all themselves, like kind of back and forth. And that would be the idea of where perhaps the king of, this area, and they've gone out, and that's where, let's say, the hero's gone out there, as part of like the research, and they fought there. And so then that's bringing back where then, back at the home front, now there's kind of tension rising between, let's say some of these other species groups, because the kind of leader king that kind of held them all together, the guy that's sitting in his place, is kind of favoring one over the other and letting them kind of
right. Oh, that's interesting. And so then our hero comes back, kind of in defeat, but also kind of in disguise. Why did Ivanhoe come back?
Well, with it, Richard, I think.
Because Richard
I think it was just unsuccessful.
Yeah.
And so it was just returning.
Yeah. And I think part of it was that Richard was captured and in an Austrian prison. And so part of the idea I guess, warfare back in the Middle Ages was much more like going to work than it is today. It was just kind of like the thing you did.
I know it was, I think it's in the Bible. And it was like the springtime, the time where kings go out to war.
Yeah, exactly. That's what you do. You'd get the grain in and then you'd go war for a little bit. Then everyone would take a break when it came time to harvest and you'd come back.
Yeah. Then store up for the winter. And, then the, stocks were low and maybe we can take a bit of, something that's been going on over there. And
yeah, exactly. So I think we know who our villain is. It's clearly the brother of the sort of the well-respected leader who now kind of holds sway over the nation of dragons. Maybe he's a that's kind of weird. See, part of it's kind of interesting because while the Saxons and the Normans were different, they also were both human. So it's like
Right.
I can't have it's difficult because you can't have it like the avians and the dragons because those are two totally different species. So maybe it's just two factions within the courts of the courts of the dragons. But ooh, dude, Ivanhoe is difficult to do.
Yeah, no, I know. Like, I know I said Five Will Goes West, and I'm really wishing that you're more familiar with that because anyway, I don't want to get into it because that's not the one we're doing. But in my mind, the way that I could see some of the other tensions of how some of this could be playing out.
I'm super into Five Will Goes West. I've seen it like 100 times. So
yeah,
we just want to change our minds right now that we're sitting here 41 minutes into the podcast. No, we're gonna power through this.
I think we need to power through it. Okay, so here's like when we're talking about this, I just had the idea of like the avian and the dragons like jousting in the air, like for the tournament, and stuff like that.
I kind of view it the avians. So how I view it is that the dragons are pretty much all uniform as far as like body shape and stuff, but the avians have like all different types. The avians have little tiny birds. They've got huge birds. They've got chickens. Like flightless birds.
Mm-hmm.
Where the dragons are like kind of all consistent as far as that goes. But okay.
Yeah, okay, so we have kind of this, border area that's kind of confederated together. Their kind of group has kind of lost control of the thing. And so that's where, our hero is coming home, but he's kind of, dispossessed? Not dispossessed, but kind of cast off from his family because it would have been his father felt that, what do we need that research thing for when there's already, so much brooding tension at home that we should be taking care of, right?
Right.
And so he was kind of dispossessed or outcast. And so he's kind of not like sneaking home, but comes home in disguise. The whole, getting dibs on the research ground has, not availed much. I think he comes back, he meets, the avian people, the Isaac of York, helps him out. And I think as far as the Ivanhoe thing goes, I think then the daughter funds him to then ride in a tournament.
Yeah.
So then we got our kind of tournament. However, then you've got, kind of because I think there was like the kind of the group of Normans that were there. They were like part of the Templar Order.
Yeah, what happened was I don't know how I'm gonna butcher the name. Bois Gilbert.
Gilbert.
He falls in love with Rebecca and then brings her back to the Temple Stowe, the stronghold of the Knights Templar. His commanding officers are like, you have brought this Jew into our sacred fortress. They think that maybe she is a sorceress who like enchanted him, and then they conduct a trial, are going to burn her at the stake, and somehow Ivanhoe finds out Bois de Gilbert loves her, but then is appointed to be the one to defend the Templars. And so then Ivanhoe and Bois de Gilbert fight, and then Gilbert falls dead, partially because he can't bring himself to try and win because he loves the woman who would die if he were to win. So you could call it an honorable death, but he still has to fight against it. And then after that, the Black Knight, who's been kind of helping out this whole time, reveals that he is in fact Richard, King Richard, freed of the Austrian prison, and he's going to sort of kick out John. So
I mean, that's really kind of the story of it. I would think of some of these Templar people, they're like griffins or something, so they're like a bigger kind of bird, and so then you've got them fighting with the dragons.
I think that so here's a concept I want to run by you. Through this whole thing, through all of Ivanhoe, what was trying to be locked down? What was trying to be locked down was control of England, right? John, Richard's son, was trying to get control of England, right? And the only reason why Ivanhoe was being harassed like he was is because he is loyal to Richard, and he was friends with and savior of Rebecca and her uncle. What was
her
his name?
father.
Her father?
Her father, Isaac of York.
Yeah. Those are two reasons why the people of the day in power didn't like him, right? Because he represented something more powerful. And so if we look at it this way, they're off on their expedition, right? Doing their fighting of the avians, right? Securing lands for themselves, right? And they come across the mandate of heaven, right? So basically they come across the ability to be in power, right? In order for that, now they take it, and at first the king, the Richard character, they're going to go and they're going to come back, and there's been some tension between the avians and different factions within the dragons, but this is going to he's going to come back and secure his place, right? And then he's captured, and Ivanhoe, it's passed off to Ivanhoe, this mandate of heaven, right? This magical, powerful thing that he can use, just like Ivanhoe can use his conviction and the reality of that fact that Richard is alive and still king and everything like that. He's going to use this so he comes back kind of in a hidden state, And so through this whole thing, this is why the dragons have been going out on expeditions over here. This is why the avians have been going on. This is why everyone has been going on expeditions over here, because one of the key tenets of the mandate of heaven is that it wants to be found. It needs to be found. And that was what was supposed to happen, is that a species evolved to the place that the sort of, not the desire, but the longing for this thing would be found, and then it would be found, and then it would tell them all of the information, and it would turn off or able to be controlled, so that they could begin to make their own ships. But the problem is it wasn't turned off. Right? It was lost. It was hard to get to. There was too many races. The fighting. That's why this has been continually happening, right?
So I had for this week sad ending, and I think I love everything you just said, and I think I've got a way to kind of wrap it up to be somewhat congruent to Ivanhoe and give kind of the sad ending.
All right, let's hear it.
So obviously in the Ivanhoe book, so in this case, like Ivanhoe is a dragon, right? The Ivanhoe character.
Yeah.
He comes back. Richard would technically in this sense be of the avian, right? However, then also you have Rebecca and Isaac of York. You've got Gilbert. I think he's like a griffin. He falls in love with Rebecca. Rebecca is in love with Ivanhoe. Ivanhoe, however, has his childhood sweetheart, who's then a dragon. And I think in the end, Ivanhoe comes in, he fights for, the, may God defend the right kind of idea, fights, wins. Gilbert dies. However, then Richard comes in, but he comes back as a phoenix, right? So it's kind of like this bird, but now he's like reborn, and now he's like half, reborn as part of like dragons.
Yeah.
A little bit, right? However, now he has the mandate of heaven. However, because of the way it is, the dragons are what was produced into the that world, right? So that world does belong to them.
Right.
With that, now Richard comes back knowing kind of all this stuff, like where it all came from, and that technically now he has the mandate of heaven. And he pretty much, some of the avians can stay, but they have to be reborn into...
Oh, no.
What's that?
I said, oh, no.
Right? Because the world is the dragons, right? And so basically, it allows the building of a ship for all the other races to go, right? With coordinates to other worlds that are inhabitable for them, right?
Okay, yeah.
So in all this, like throughout the whole, and that's kind of why it's a sad ending, where a lot of the, let's say the hero, the good guy, it's like, we can work together, we can get along, all this stuff, all this infighting can be put aside, and like the congruency.
Yeah.
However, in the end, it ends where then, of course, he steps in, fights for the innocence of Rebecca. However, then he turns her down. And in the Ivanhoe book ends with, I think, Rebecca consoling with Ivanhoe's wife now, or whatever it was,
Rowana,
as then they're leaving because like they can't stay there anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
Isaac and Rebecca went to Grenada. Yeah.
Right. And so I think tying that in, all the other races are basically expelled from that planet. So it's kind of like all this other research that all the other scientists have been doing come together. And then, Richard comes back. He's got the mandate of heaven and ultimately kind of is like, well, you know what? This is it. Right.
Yeah.
And kind of takes charge. He's the champion for the dragons. Right.
Right.
But then other people can kind of stay, but then they have to then go through like either a rebirth stage where some of the aliens, maybe they can, but then everybody else is basically kind of shipped off. Where then kind of sadly enough, as far as where all the tension and story is happening, the Ivanhoe character ultimately then chooses to, remain loyal to Richard, marries his sweetheart, and all the other characters are all kind of expelled in this kind of like, and was it kind of like where the whole thing is building where like, why can't we all get along? Only for the kind of good guy to kind of come back, save the day, good is conquered, but now everyone else get out.
Yeah, that is a sad ending, but that is accurate to the book.
Yeah. So
well, great. I think our stumbling around, we've come across a good way to end it.
Yeah.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. We're still learning how to tell stories. Every day, we're learning more and more. If you have any questions about this story or about our process, just send us an email at waititgetsbettercast@gmail.com or add us on Twitter, @getsbettercast. We'd be happy to answer any of your questions. We would answer your questions or make a video or a podcast about answering your questions or listen to your complaints. I'm happy to listen to your complaints. We will see you guys next week for the wrap-up episode as we talk about this one, and then we'll be on to bigger and better stories. Thanks, everybody. Bye.